when I think of it in that way, the terms defective, inadequate, emotionally cut off, and the belief that there's something inherently wrong with me, I can see how that would influence the way that I live and the way I relate to people.
Hey everybody, and welcome to a special episode of Wednesdays with Watson. We are in a series of episodes in our season 3, which we are calling Trauma, Spaces, Places, and ACEs. And so we are focusing on one of the ACEs that many have found helpful in helping them process trauma, and that is the Enneagram, which simply is a tool and is not the Holy Grail. But when we focus it and we combine it with a gospel-centered approach, it can really be effective to help us understand how we behave, what drives our fears, what drives our motivations, but more importantly, how we can get better, especially in the presence of trauma. So today we have Type 4, and this is my friend, Rachel Odom. Rachel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we are so excited to have you, and so as we dive right into the Enneagram 4, the first question I want to ask you is, what is your favorite thing about how God made you?
You know, I'm pretty funny. And like the type of funny where I don't really have to try, it kind of just happens. I really stink at telling jokes, but physical comedy, it's kind of like the Lord just wove that into my personality. So I really love that and getting to make people laugh.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, one of the things, Crissy, that we mentioned and that Karissa mentioned about the Type 4 that is so true about you, Rachel, is usually Type 4s are incredibly creative. And so I love that about how God made you, actually.
Yeah, it's a blessing and a curse. Just because it's definitely mostly a blessing, just because perspective on things, and I have ideas for like painting is my big thing. So I get some pretty cool ideas for painting and just how he likes to. And it's funny because I paint whatever the Lord tells me to paint. So rarely the ideas are ever from me; they're always from the Lord.
I love that.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And Crissy, you probably see a little bit, since I'm a 2 in health when I go to 4. Do you find me more creative?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. It's very cool to see that. And being someone who is not as creative, I love that you can paint, and things that I wish I could express myself through art. So it's really cool to see different personality types.
Yeah, and especially it's cool to see you use it as you process some trauma too. So I love that. Well, let's dive right in here, because I know listeners are very interested. And so I loved the pre-interview. We had some really cool conversations back and forth, and the core fear really resonated with you. And so I want to read that core fear of the Enneagram Type 4 as Karissa explained it to us on that episode. The core fear of the Enneagram 4 is feeling inadequate, flawed, or emotionally cut off. Can you explain to us and tell me, because I loved the organic nature of the way when you and I were going back and forth, of how this core fear really resonated with you?
Yeah. So I guess before the list of words that she gave, like what you just said, really resonated. But before I kind of go into that a little bit, she first gave the definition, I guess, of what a core fear was. And so she said that it's us trying to protect ourselves from whatever it is, and it's on a subconscious level, and we're running from it. And so at that point, for me, the term core fear transitioned from something kind of passive, kind of like how you think like, oh, I'm super afraid of spiders, but you don't see spiders all the time.
Right.
So it's at certain, and it transitioned from something passive into something that's active. So like it influences how I think, how I behave, how I react to things. And the fact that it's subconscious was like, that makes so much sense. So yeah, when I think of it in that way, the terms defective, inadequate, emotionally cut off, and the belief that there's something inherently wrong with me, I can see how that would influence the way that I live and the way I relate to people and all of that.
Can you tell us of an example of when understanding that core fear has actually benefited you in a positive way?
Yeah. So, so I guess in the area of flashbacks, because I struggle with both kind of emotional and visual flashbacks. And before I even knew what they were, I kind of just thought I was crazy. So I guess an example of this was during the season of my life, I wasn't doing well. And one of my friends could tell I wasn't doing well, even though I didn't say anything. And she asked me to get lunch the next day after she noticed. And I went, and I remember driving to this lunch, and I was talking to myself on the way there, and I was like, you'll go in, and the childhood message also kind of fuels this, but I was like, you will be vague, you will give the bare minimum, you will shift the focus back to her, and we're not gonna sit with this. On the focus will not be on you because we're uncomfortable with that. So, and I actually went into the lunch and I spilled my guts. And I left, and I went into full freak out mode because for me, I was thrown back into this place of that was way too much for that person. And so that core fear was then triggered of I'm defective, I'm inadequate in the way of like I'm not able to be as good a friend because I just spilled my guts to this person. So now that I understand that fear and how it influences my reactions to things, when I'm in one of those flashbacks, I can then recognize, okay, this is what's happening. You are okay. You are loved. And I can then ground myself. So that was kind of a negative example, but there's a positive aspect to it now of what I've learned.
Oh, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah, I love that. And just for the listeners out there, Rachel just referred to flashbacks. And so if you're new to the podcast, this is a podcast on trauma, and flashbacks is a hallmark of PTSD. So the fact that you were able to really kind of combine that and understand that, I think, is what this is all about. It's why we are doing this series, because you having that knowledge where you were then able to walk it back, because this is how God made you. And so you beautifully transition to my next question. You are one of the few that really resonated with the childhood messaging. And that childhood messaging, and because so many people are like, I don't want to talk about this because I don't want them to think I had terrible parents. And so just as a means of quickly recapping what childhood messaging is, as described by Karissa Harrison in that episode, is either implicit or explicit messages that we receive. We receive those messages in a couple different ways. Some of them with intent to harm. That would be my story. Some of them without intent to harm because parents aren't perfect. And then we have influencing messages. Trauma certainly will give us a childhood message. And so the childhood message of the 4, which really resonated with you, is because type 4s have big emotions. They feel things. They will take on the pain of other people. And they do it amazingly well. 4s are amazing for this. They're a lot of fun too, right? Because everything is big, right? And everything is just like, I want it all. I want all the feels as the Enneagram 4. But so that's how God made you, and you're in His image and your Psalm 139ness. But the message that you received was, it is not okay, basically, to be who I am, right? It is not okay to be too much or not enough. This resonated quite a bit with you. And so I am wondering, because you mentioned something, and I'm going to give you the mic here for a minute, because after having understood that, you realized that you yourself and your creativeness had created what you said as a happy medium. Tell us a little bit about that happy medium.
Yeah. So when I think of, at first, when I thought of, okay, it's not okay to be too much, it's not okay to be not enough, the first thing that came to my mind was, okay, so what's the perfect balance? Like, where's the middle ground in that? Because I can't be too this, I can't be too that. And that's basically what my happy medium is. It's this middle ground that I've carved out and that I live in. And so I guess to kind of explain this, and like, I'm such a visual learner, so to explain this in like a talking visual way you know how you take a video on an iPhone and then you can go back and you can adjust it
Yes.
and you can trim it. And so whatever portion you decide to keep of the video is inside this yellow box. It's that way kind of with my person. So I have trimmed the edges, or I've trimmed whatever fit within the expectations or of my parents or my friends or whoever I was interacting with. And so the world or the people that I interact with, they now get the yellow box. And so on either side of the yellow box, those like faded out parts of the video, nobody really sees that. Yeah. So it's kind of like, and it was created to avoid basically shame, because when I touch that end of the spectrum that's too much, there's shame for being too much. And then when I touch the end of the spectrum that's not enough, there's shame for being not enough. And so I've basically created that to avoid those feelings.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes me sad in some ways, because we talk about shame a lot on the podcast, and I would imagine even guilt, like, oh, I met with a friend and I held back, I didn't really minister to them, and so I can see where guilt would come in too, which is really kind of a beautiful transition to one of the hallmarks of the Enneagram 4 is that you are able to show empathy and hold space for others. I want to ask you this. So you're able to hold space for others. It is your superpower, right? Especially as Christians, it is your opportunity to sit with people in their pain and feel it. So do you see where maybe it would be a good opportunity for you to move away from that happy medium? Do you see where it would be advantageous as you step into your Psalm 139 is to be like, that happy medium, that's not who God made me. God made me for big emotions. And I'm not saying to go sit with people and, and not pray about it and be wise and discerning and those things. But do you see where maybe moving out of that happy medium and moving into who God made you, your 1 Peter 2:9-ness, could really help your superpower as you sit and hold empathy and have empathy for those who are hurting?
Absolutely. The Lord has already presented me with opportunities, and by His grace, I had the strength to act on them and step into those opportunities, and the ministry that came out of that, and the connection with people, and even some healing that came, was absolutely, worth stepping out of that happy medium for.
Perfect. I'm so happy to hear that as your friend and as somebody who just prays for you and really has had an opportunity to mentor you. And I was getting ready to ask you, are you going to have some accountability for not living in the happy medium? But I will sign up for that.
In the pre-interview, you had mentioned that it's kind of like a 20-sided dice, being a 4. And so I really want listeners to understand what you're talking about there, because it really is your ability to hear and understand and feel everyone's emotions is a superpower. But there's also the 20-sided dice that I think is what causes that to some degree.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you mentioned, which will lead us into the next question, is I want you to tell this story because I can't tell it any better. So the 20-sided dice plus being a 4 plus trauma.
Yeah.
The mic is yours, my friend.
Y'all have to bear with me for all of the visual analogies. So the 20-sided dice thing. So imagine if everybody starts their life with like this perfect round ball, and then the ball just starts rolling, and the dents and dings and that can be put into the ball are wounds, hurts, and trauma, what have you. Your ball isn't going to stay perfectly round for very long, because it's just, we live in a broken world, in a fallen world, and that's the result of that. You're going to be hurt and wounded. But for complex trauma survivors, a lot of the times those wounds and hurts are across a deep and broad spectrum. And here's a personal example. So I've been exposed to both prolonged repetitive trauma and single event trauma. So for the complex trauma survivor who can't help her reactions or behaviors because a fear is activated or a message has been repeated, I can sit and hold space with her because I understand what that's like. And I can see past the surface when to others it may look like she just wants attention. But on the flip side, for a single event trauma survivor who may experience visual flashbacks and potentially feel dumb because it was a one-time occurrence, I understand that too. So I can sit and hold space with that person as well in their anxiety about it and remind them that it's okay in context of what their flashback is about and help them ground if needed. And so my myriad of experiences has, plus my emotional depth, allows me access to a lot of different perspectives emotionally on a deep level. But I also have sides on my dice that aren't even trauma informed. So like, and fours are super empathizers, regardless of whether they have a ton of trauma or not. And I guess here's an example of that. So I was a nanny for an infant for a few months, and I was with her for 10 hours a day for 5 days a week. And it was so hard. But because of that experience, I now have a side on my dice that empathizes with stay-at-home moms because that job is so hard and they are so amazing for what they do. So yeah.
How does it affect you? You empathize with others when they share. Do you take on those burdens? Is it hard for you? Do you carry that weight? As what we love you because you listen to us and empathize with us, but do you go home feeling that burden?
I used to, yes. I used to take it all on and kind of just shoulder it myself, and it made me very tired and very weary because I was walking around with my own burdens and my own struggles, and then these people I love are all struggling, and so that would kind of just put the rocks in the backpack. But one thing I've really had to learn and get a hold on over the years is giving them to the Lord. It doesn't mean I can't feel them. It doesn't mean I can't love them or pray for them, but the Lord shoulders that burden with me, and He is the second oxen in my plow. And so we shoulder that together, and there's so much power in that because there's prayer, and the one who's shouldering it with me is the one who I pray to. So He understands all of that and strengthens me as well. So it's seriously leaning on the Lord and staying in tune with Him.
Yeah, for sure. And you just kind of alluded to a verse that's mentioned so many times on this podcast. Maybe the most mentioned verse is Hebrews 4:15, that we do not serve a high priest who is unfamiliar with our sufferings. And one of the things that I would just love to encourage you as your friend and your mentor is John Eldredge said, and this is literally, he came out with this book, it's called Taking Back Your Life, right before the pandemic. And he said, we are not made to take on the troubles of the world. Instead, we are meant to take on the troubles of our village. And so just when, as a 2, I get a little bit of that. So when I'm healthy, I go to you. So 2s go to 4s and healthy. And so I absolutely have, and I will take on the pains of other people. And I will never forget talking to a mutual friend that you and I have, Cheryl Rice, who actually brought this John Eldredge quote to my forefront. It was like, Amy, you are not meant to take on the pain of all the things. I almost mentioned some things, but make sure that you're taking care of your village. And so I'm glad to hear you say, look, and I love that visual, don't you, Crissy, of the 2-sided oxen.
Yes, yes.
I never knew what an oxen was until my counselor literally has one in his office. I was like, what is that? And it helped me understand Matthew 11:28 a little bit better. I was like, I'm a city girl. I'm sorry. I don't know what an oxen is. And so, but one of the things, too, that I wanted to ask you is you and I talked about, and people can hear this in your voice, in Genesis 1:26 and 27, God made us in His image. And so this incredibly empathetic person that He made you and that He made me, He did that on purpose, right? In Psalm 139, we see that, too. And so one of the things that you and I talked about is understanding that core fear that we talked about at the beginning. understanding the childhood messaging that you received, that it was not okay to be you, basically. It was not okay to have the big emotions. It was not okay to sit and empathize with people. It simply was not okay. But there's been freedom and the understanding of how God made us, especially when trauma is present, right? Rachel, would you agree with me? And Crissy, I'm going to ask you this question too, because you've had trauma. On a basic level, have you been able to process your trauma better because you understand how God made you?
Yes.
How about you, Chris?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. So it certainly helps us understand, and as we pay attention to how it affects us. Can you tell us a little bit about the freedom that you feel? And I think people are hearing it in your voice, but talk to us about, do you remember a before and after? Like, I feel way more free now that I understand how God made me, versus, like you were talking about earlier, the guilt and the shame. Can you explain some of that freedom and understanding how God made you?
That I think a lot of my freedom has started personally with my relationship to myself, because that was a very strained and hateful relationship for a long time. And so, and I like alone time. I live alone. I do kind of like, so I have a lot of time to think and just talk out loud. And so when that relationship with myself was strained and hateful, time alone was very exhausting, because my brain would just go,
right.
and repeat failures and all of these things. But now, in light of how God has made me, and it's such a work in progress. I am by no means like completely free. Healing is such a process. But definitely there have been strides in where if I'm feeling something super deeply, or if it's overwhelming, I allow myself to sit there and feel it. And I allow myself to process whatever comes with that. So if I'm feeling overwhelming sadness, I now allow myself to cry. Or if I'm feeling overwhelming anger, I now go to God in my anger. Versus before, I felt guilty about going to God in my anger, because I was like, he doesn't deserve that. Even though I wasn't really mad at him in the first place.
Yeah.
He still doesn't deserve that negative emotion. There's been freedom in just going to him with who I am, because he, even though sometimes it may feel like nobody else feels things as deeply as I feel things, or nobody quite understands that, he does, because he's a deeply emotional God. He made me this way.
Right.
So,
right.
There's been freedom in that aspect.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about what you just said is that that I've learned in my Enneagram work, and and Karissa Harrison is my Enneagram coach. One of the questions she asked me is, how can you show compassion for yourself? And what you just described to us is showing compassion for yourself, like allowing yourself to go there, allowing yourself to feel it. Don't you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that is such health. That is such health, and so I just want to tell you I'm proud of you for that.
Tell us how the last 20 months or so have been as a type 4.
Full. Yeah, for someone who feels things deeply, there were times in the past 20 months where I convinced myself we don't feel anything at all. I was like, no. In the last 20 months, I retyped myself as a type 5. Because I was like,
you retyped yourself. I love it.
We're not doing this. Because, but just between, the pandemic and everything going on with that, and then, personal health issues, and there's just been so much loss within the pandemic, and then everything going on, overseas, it's very full. But that's also created and opened my eyes to just how dependent I am on the Lord for his strength and his ability to sustain me and sit, and he sits and holds space with me like I can do for other people.
Yeah, so would that be your tip? There are other fours that are going to be listening, and right now the pandemic doesn't seem to be letting up. And so is that your advice for them? Is do you have any practical advice? Like, I stopped watching the news. Like, I literally had people, somebody messaged me the other day and said, hey, you guys okay from that hurricane? And I was like, what hurricane? Because I simply can't turn on the news. And so do you have any practical things that you found as a four who feels so deeply over the last 20 months that you could share with other Enneagram type fours like that, like not watching the news?
I think this might sound a little funny, but reading fiction books.
Amen, sister. I have been reading like you would not believe. Oh my gosh, it really does help. Yes.
Do you have four in you?
Hello? Finally, someone else realizes, yes, go get lost in another world. Amen. Yeah.
Yeah, you're speaking our language. See, I'm a nonfiction. Yeah. I read both, but I don't know why. But
she gets lost in all the real stuff, and I'm like, dude, let's leave the real world and go to our fictional world. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true.
Like, I have to be like strengthened for fictional or nonfiction books.
Yes.
I love being informed and I love the information, but ain't nothing like fiction.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I've been trying to get her to read The Body Keeps the Score for, I don't know,
2 years.
A little over a year. Yeah, she's read.
20 pages were really
good. That's hilarious. Let me ask you this. I love this question. It's actually Crissy's question that I'm asking. But what do you wish that the world knew about type fours? And more specifically, for those people out there listening who have type fours in their lives, how can we love you and do life, I'm going to say better, assuming that we're not doing it well, but...
Yes, and I have one add-on to that.
Okay.
Yes, is how can we help you step out of the happy medium and be who you are on the daily? How do we help you thrive? What would you say to your friends and family?
So, what I wish the world knew, and this is just off of me, my experience personally, if you have type fours in your life, I know we can seem self-absorbed sometimes, but it's because we have a big inner world, like really big, and it needs to be taken care of, just like any other human. But sometimes we can get stuck and distracted by, something we found from 9 years ago, or just whatever is going on. But I promise it's not with ill intent.
Yeah, I think that's really important to note. If you love a four,
they've got a lot going on inside.
Yeah, because you're like me, you're in that center of intelligence in the heart. And so be kind to fours. I think I'm answering the second part of Crissy's questions for you.
I'm thinking along the lines of allowing big emotions and being participating and saying, and if you're sobbing because it's been a really emotional, don't say, okay, calm down, you're fine. Instead, embrace it and say, you're feeling so much, and coming alongside, what are the things that make you feel validated rather than, okay, let me get back into my happy medium.
And I think that the obvious answer is prayer too, right?
Yeah. Prayer, and this is real simple. Listen. Because a lot of times we are very self-aware, and so we know and understand what's going on in here. A lot of times we keep it inside because we're afraid of being too much, or in that, not enough. So allowing space for just like, hey, I can tell you've got a lot going on right now. If you need a pair of ears, I'm here.
Yeah.
Some of my closest friendships, they just come in and they sit on my couch and will just let me go for like however long. And a lot of times we don't need somebody to fix our problems. I feel like that's a little bit intimidating when approaching a four, because it's like, oh, they have such big emotions. I don't know if I can help them in an adequate way. But just by listening and sitting and being present is such a big help, because that in and of itself is allowing us to be who we are just by getting it out, and we are feeling it all in the process. So yeah, and then in the process of you listening, or whoever listening, we then have that open door to reciprocate, because now there's that emotional connection, versus if we hold it all inside, we are deeply emotional, but a lot of times that stifles our ministry because nobody else really knows that, because we keep it all in. So
that's really helpful, especially to sit and listen, because I'm a fixer. And so to understand that the real need is to be heard, and to sit, listen, let all those emotions out. And I feel it, like you talk about the balloon, letting some air out of the balloon, so that you do have room to empathize with the next person or the next situation, but not just rushing in with, okay, we'll fix it with this, this, and this, but listen, sit, listen.
Yeah, and I think that listeners out there, I think sometimes we could be ugly. One of the things that Rachel said to me when she read about the core fear is, well, and I quote, "Nobody likes that." And so you created the happy medium. Well, as we move towards the end of the podcast here, Rachel, I want to tell you that everybody wants that. I want a 4 in my life that can empathize with me. If I have 4 friends, and clearly I have you, type 4, as well as others. And again, I want to really, really stress that we don't think that the Enneagram is a holy grail, but we absolutely believe that even in this work, as we have prepared for 9 interviews, it has been really cool to watch people as they prepare for the interview really step into who God made them and understand that, oh, and I get a lot of me too. And so is there anything else that you would like to share with Enneagram Type 4s out there? And I might add, with or without trauma, but you and I share quite a bit of, we both have a significant amount of trauma. This is a trauma podcast, though this is a special series in understanding ourselves. But any parting words to Type 4s out there that are listening? You just did a pretty good job of telling them to listen to us. And so, but we were going to, I think, guys, pray for Type 4s, pray for their hearts, be accountable with them so that they don't take on too much.
Yeah. The only thing I really want to say is that I see y'all, Type 4s.
Yeah.
God sees you. And he wants you. And he does not think you are too much. And he doesn't think you're not enough either.
Right.
He sees you as his child.
Made in his image.
And to quote Crissy on another podcast, are you going to look at God and say, this is horrible what you made? And so if you're a Type 4 out there, you are enough. We love you. We see you. We hear you. And so as we end the podcast here, thank you guys so much. Tune in a couple of weeks for the next Enneagram Type, which is Type 5. But Rachel, before we do that, I have something I want to tell you and everybody listening. You're seen. You're known. You're heard. You're loved. And you're valued. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's been our pleasure. Well, guys, I hope that you enjoyed that conversation with our Type 4 Enneagram, Rachel Odom. I am so grateful that she agreed to come on to the show today. I think that she provided so much insight for those of you who are Enneagram 4s and for those of you who love Enneagram 4s. So we are in the middle of this series. We will be back in 2 weeks with a very special episode before moving on to the Enneagram 5. And so if you haven't already, while you're in your podcast app, open it up, click there, and contact Amy. Button is there. You can follow me on Instagram, follow the Patreon account where there's bonus content, as well as other things there in the show notes. I would love it if you would share or like the podcast, as that does help us get the word out. So until 2 weeks, you know what I'm going to say. You are seen, you are known, you are heard, you are loved, and you are valued. See you guys in 2 weeks here in the Healing Zone. Let my life glow.